Hello. I'm Jamie of Cranky Kangaroo, and recently I posted a video about the diagonal quilt backing process, technique, what have you. I have never had so many comments on a video. Apparently this was a hot topic or a controversial one, I'm not sure. Can you hear the thunder? So I thought I'd go through these questions one at a time because I did plan on doing a follow-up video, especially once my brain had some time to make sense of the math. It hasn't yet, but we'll work through it together. It's okay. So if you haven't seen this method before, it's really just a way to use fabric to back a quilt that is narrower than the width of your quilt. So like say I have, well, actually this is too big for a quilt, but let's say I have this as a quilt. So I finished a quilt and I need to back it and quilt it, but I only have this as backing. So, you know, traditionally, yes, we might cut it in half. Like if I have yardage and it's 45 inches across, I might cut it in half and sew it, you know, long ways. But if I don't have enough enough yardage that's double the length, which in this case, it just barely. So like if, you know, if I didn't have quite enough, I can't really do that anyways. So there's a problem. So this is just a way to make use of backing or fabric that is not quite as wide as it needs to be. The other thing about this is if I have yardage, so say this is 45 inches, well, if my quilt is 60 inches wide, I don't need 90 inches of backing. I just don't. So this is a really nice way to use fabric that might not have worked under traditional methods of backing, of preparing your backing for backing your quilt. I tried the method, I've done it twice now, and it worked surprisingly well. I was trying to come up with downsides, and I really could not find a downside. Now there are a couple in the comments that we'll discuss. So I just want to run through the comments and we'll talk about that. We'll problem solve. And I was seeing if the quilt that I finished is out here. It's not, but I'll show it to you at the end and you can see the diagonal backing on it. What was the other one I did? Actually, the other one I did might be out here. Okay, so this is the first one I did with that diagonal method. And I don't know if you can see this, but okay, so there's the diagonal line right there. Yeah, I'm really not sure if you can see it, but it essentially runs from this corner right there, diagonally down the back of the quilt to that corner there. And it worked really well the first two times. So let's cover some questions or some comments. The Mama T says, hi, where did you get the backing fabric from? I apologize if you said I have the volume down because everyone is sleeping. Oh, I feel that pain. The one she's talking about is the orange I used in the last video. It's actually from a quilt shop in Chickasha, Oklahoma. It's Gail's Family Affair, Gail's Quilting, Chickasha, Oklahoma. I just looked it up, but it's Gail's Family Affair. That's where I got it from. It was a remnant, so it was like 108 because it was wide backing, but it was only like 63 inches. So by using the diagonal method, I was able to use not much of backing on a full-size quilt. Question or comment next is Brenda Less 5960 says, is this the John Flynn's method? He has a formula that takes the guesswork out of it. I've occasionally used that method for quite some time, so I'm trying to figure out what is new on this one. Enjoy the video. Thank you, Brenda. Okay, first of all, it could very well be his method. I've just seen reels and videos and I've seen it all over. So if it is his method, awesome. And if he has like a spreadsheet or something or a diagram or whatever, awesome. I didn't necessarily say it was new, just new to me. And new to the, you know, like it's popular, it's having its heyday apparently. So yeah, John Flynn, look it up. Corner Eyes 1282 maybe, says, I'm so confused. You and me both, not just you. Sun Jade Vinny 2524 says, what are those blue clamps that fit over the bars that you use for loading your backing? Those look nice to have. Those clamps are provided by Grace Frame, and they just clamp onto your frame, onto your bars, so you don't have to pin your quilt backing or anything. So I just clamp my quilt backing on, and I don't have to deal with pinning, or it's so fast. So you can actually get those graceframe.com and use my coupon code. So if you use Cranky Kangaroo and Cranky Kangaroo 15 and combine those, you'll get 20% off of your blue quilt clips. Cheryl Nugent 1206 says, this is too confusing. Why not just take off the side and add it to the bottom? Take off the side and add it to the bottom, because you might not have the right width. So like if I have a wide backing, I might only be able to use, I don't know, 10 inches here. Well, I might need more than 10 inches down here. So the math doesn't always work out. Like sometimes, yeah, that's great, but then you're doing extra seams. You might also not like the way those seams end up. Like maybe I don't want this random seam right here. I like the look of the diagonal, or maybe I just don't want a seam at all. Or the other thing is, I talked about in the first video, oftentimes we're warned about, depending on how you load your quilt on the frame, if you have a horizontal seam, it'll advance nicely and you only have to deal with it once as it goes across. If you have it as a vertical seam, it's going to build up on itself, and then like you're going to have a thicker portion of your quilt here and a thinner portion, and so it's uneven, and so sometimes that can mess you up as you're long arming or as you're quilting. So yeah, sometimes that's a viable option, but sometimes it's just not. So it really just depends on what you're working on. And yeah, it was confusing. I know that. Like it's an odd little system. So we're gonna see if we can crack into it a little more today. Barb Nix 4717 says, I want to do the diagonal quilting, but I've watched people struggle with the backing. I am going to try to make leader cloth shaped for doing a quilt on the diagonal with either the large sew type magnets or zippers. In my mind, it works. Thanks for the video. Okay, to be clear, nothing is actually on the diagonal when you're quilting by the time you have it back together. So let's do this real quick. So say this is my quilt, and I have some backing that is, let's pretend it's not even long enough to double up. Because like if it's 45 inches or if it's whatever, 60 inches, I can't double this up and get what I need. However, if I cut it on the diagonal, I'm gonna eyeball this. If I cut it on the diagonal, we're just gonna pretend here. So what happens is you actually can make your quilt, your backing wider. See how now we have a nice little rectangle or square. So we've taken advantage of, we have some extra length, but we don't have enough to double it. And sometimes I don't need it doubled. If this was 45, I don't necessarily need 90 inches for the width of my quilt, or my quilt, it doesn't matter, but essentially it's a way of making use of fabric when you can't just double it and use a double width. So by the time you're done stitching this together, you're back to working with a rectangle. You trim off the extra here and there, and you have a rectangle. You're never dealing with diagonal or bias seams once it's sewn back together. So once you sew this seam, you're back to straight of grain on all four sides. So I hope that answered or replied to what you're saying. Georgian Co USA says, I love your math calculation process. Can't tell you how much I relate. Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me. Marie Pine Strupland 1671 says, I took a piece of paper and cut a rectangle with the same proportions and cut it diagonally. It makes it easier for me to understand. Yeah, exactly. And I could have done that. I knew the idea. I just was too lazy to do the math. But yeah, essentially, we can do it again on this one. You're cutting it in half diagonally. So let's see actually what this measures. I do have a ruler. Let's say this one is, we'll call it 6 by, it's almost 6 by 6. We'll call it 6 by 6. We'll say I have a quilt that's like, we'll call it 6 by 8. You know, let's just use even numbers. So let's say instead of 6 by 6, it's 60 by 60, and I have a 60 by 80 inch quilt. And so this will not work under normal circumstances for that quilt. But if I cut on the diagonal, and shimmy it, so now what we have is, can I hold on to this? Yeah, okay. So now we have 8 right there. And then, I don't know if I can hold this and do it the other way. We have 8 and like even 9. So do you see how by shifting it on the diagonal, you're changing your length and width. So we're gonna shift it this way, and now my quilt top will fit on this backing. So where we started with the 6 inch, 6 by 6, when you shift it on the diagonal, you now get, you know, 8 by 9, 6 by 8, whatever you need. And it depends on how much you shift it, you know, how much length or width you gain. Rhonda Swayze 9670 says, love that quilt top, thank you. It's Sail Away by Legit Kits. Mary Lamb 4254, me personally, I would have done waves rushing in and the sky. Yes, for quilting, she's saying. I would have normally, but I got the thing loaded up horizontally and I didn't want to have to do waves, you know, up and down. So had I loaded it vertically, and I would have done waves. Also, I just need to get it done because I'm going to Hawaii for July, and I'm going to set up and do some sales, S-A-L-E-S, not S-A-I-L-S. I'm going to sell some quilts on the bay on cruise ship day. So I really just wanted to get this one done. But yes, this is a great quilt to have fun with in the negative space and with the waves and that kind of thing. Newbie Quilter says, oh my goodness, this reminds me of the old comedy routine of Abbott and Costello, who's on first. Yeah, no, that's fair. Critter Watcher 8009 says, I hadn't seen this trick and I loved watching you work through it, even making the wrong side together mistake, because I would have done that. I also liked the don't be afraid of the bias attitude and how you just slid those scissors across the fold. I absolutely am not afraid of the bias. Please don't be afraid of the bias. A lot of times, a really common question I get in foundation paper piecing is, do you worry about straight of grain or bias when you're piecing? And I love that question because no, I don't. You're putting so many pieces together. I don't worry about bias. And even outside of foundation paper piecing, if I'm working with a bias, a diagonal, a stretchy seam, don't be afraid of it. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. And it's not as scary as you might think. Okay. Marianne May 4760 says, I heard that the bias weave on the back makes the needle go through easier for quilting. Did it? Oh, no, I didn't really notice a difference. I don't know why it would make a difference, because no matter where your seam is, your needle is going to go through 2 layers, you know, where the seam is doubled back on itself, where you iron it. I mean, so no, I don't think it made a difference, and I don't know why it would necessarily, because no. Okay, I think that's all of the questions. Is it all of the questions? Okay, that's all the questions. So if you have any more questions, feel free to leave them. I hope that didn't leave you more confused. It's an interesting method. And like I said, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, there's no way that's a good idea. I just like being a naysayer. But it actually is really cool, and it's kind of efficient. And actually I like it more than having to like double my fabric and sew that extra long seam that's just torturous to sew. Anyways, so I'd much rather just cut it diagonally and get it done. I can show you the other quilt actually. Okay, this is the actual quilt I was working on in the video. And yeah, I ended up doing it all over stippling, which I think turned out just fine. And then the back of it is this fun orange, and I think you can see the seam. Yeah, kind of. It's here again. And I'm gonna be completely honest, I serged it and then I didn't even press it. So I don't know that it like goes the same way all the way down. Actually, it feels pretty good. Like, it's not like I have a bunch of like bumps and stuff, but so you can see it's this diagonal seam. Maybe you can see, I don't know. I do know there was another comment, and for some reason it's not showing up on my computer, but there was another comment that said something about like, isn't that destabilizing? Like that diagonal seam across the back, that must be destabilizing for the front of the quilt. And then what happens when you hang it? And I don't see how that's gonna happen either, because you're sewing the seam back together. So, I mean, you sew the seam back together. So anytime, I mean, you're still dealing with straight edges along the edge, and that's what really matters. But I mean, you're sewing the seam back together, so it's not like you have bias edges along the outside of your quilt. So I'm not seeing how it would be destabilizing. Maybe maybe I don't know, but no, because you still have straight of grain along the edges, and then you quilt it. So everything's stabilized together. Because that's the other thing I say when people ask about straight of grain on a quilt. I mean, even if you were like super concerned and as you're cutting your foundation paper piecing, you know, you were worried about straight of grain, well, you can only get straight of grain. Like if you're dealing with a triangle, you're only getting it straight of grain on one side of the triangle, on one edge of the triangle. The other two are going to be off grain anyways. So no matter how hard you try, you're going to be dealing with bias edges. You're going to be dealing with all kinds of grain lines on the front of the quilt. But that's kind of the point of putting pieces together and then batting and then backing, and they all kind of work together to stabilize each other. The backing with that diagonal seam line is not going to make a difference in the stabilization process. That diagonal seam is stabilized because it's seamed, because it's sewn back together. So I think it's a fun method. Feel free to leave more comments. Feel free to ask more questions. If you need me to just do the whole thing over again, let me know. If the Laurel and Hardy act did not work for you, let me know. I'll be catching up on the reaching the mermaid sew along soon, because I did actually finish my reaching quilt while I was at the Chesaning, Michigan retreat at Creative Passions, and we're already working on scheduling a retreat for next year, so stay tuned there. I have so much footage I need to edit and post, and I have a new like schedule written down, like to-do list written down, and I'm trying really hard to get those posted. I also tried really hard to enlist my son to be my video editor, and that did not work out so well. So it's just me. But yeah, thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here, and I will see you soon.